Some people love to deliver bad news in public. They like the audience. They like the echo. My name is Michael Fox. I'm 41 years old. I'm a forensic accountant based in Columbus, Ohio, which means I spend my days finding the numbers people try to hide. It's slow, quiet, methodical work. It requires patience. It requires the ability to sit with a truth for a long time before you do anything with it. That skill, as it turns out, has uses outside the office. On a Monday morning in mid-March 2025, I was sitting in a waiting area on the second floor of Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital on Olentangy River Road, waiting for a follow-up appointment with my cardiologist. 8 months earlier, during the final stretch of my divorce, I'd developed what my doctor called a stress-induced cardiac event. Nothing catastrophic, no heart attack, no surgery, just my body sending me a memo I'd been ignoring for 2 years. The memo said, "This is not sustainable." I'd finally started listening. The divorce had been finalized in March 2024. 1 year earlier, almost to the day. Krista and I had been married for 7 years. We met in 2015 at a conference in downtown Columbus, got married in June 2017 at a venue in the short north, and spent the better part of those 7 years building what I thought was a life. What she was building, it turned out, was an exit strategy, and she'd brought help. The help had a name: Kelvin. Kelvin Banks. 43 years old, my closest friend since grad school at Ohio State, the kind of man who gave a toast at my wedding and then spent the next 4 years making sure it didn't last. I found out about Kelvin and Krista in October 2023. I won't dwell on how. What I will tell you is that by January 2025, Krista had delivered a baby boy. Their baby. And the whole arrangement had been dressed up and presented to the world as proof that Krista had simply found her person, that I had been, in the polite phrase people use, not the right fit. I was fine with that. I was past the anger. I had my work, my apartment near Grandview Heights, and a Tuesday morning cardiology appointment that I was not going to be late for. That was before Lisa Wendy found me in the hallway. Lisa was Krista's mother. 59 years old, born and raised in Westerville, Ohio, the kind of woman who treated other people's pain like a gift she'd been waiting to unwrap. She was at Riverside that morning. I'd later learned she was visiting a friend on the 3rd floor. When she spotted me sitting near the elevator bank with a paper coffee cup in my hand, looking exactly like a man minding his own business. She did not let that stand. She walked the length of that hallway with purpose. Not hurrying, just deliberate. The way people walk when they've been waiting for an opportunity and they've finally spotted it. She stopped about 3 feet from me and looked me over, my jacket, my tired eyes, the coffee cup, and her chin came up just slightly. "Well," Lisa said, not a greeting, a preamble. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Lisa," I kept my voice level. "Small city." She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "I suppose it is. You know, Krista had the baby in January. A boy. Healthy, happy," she paused, letting that land. "Kelvin is wonderful with him." I looked at her over the rim of my coffee cup and said nothing. That was apparently the wrong response, because what came next came out loud enough for the nurse at the station 12 feet away to turn her head. "Leaving you was the best decision Krista ever made. She has a real family now. A son. A man who actually shows up." Lisa's voice was warm, almost kind, the way a verdict sounds when the judge has already decided. "You were always the problem, Michael. Deep down, I think you knew that." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I sat there with my coffee, and I looked at her, and after a moment, I said the only thing that felt true. "Is that what you believe?" She blinked. She'd expected something. Tears, defense, a flinch, something she could use. She got stillness instead, and stillness throws people like Lisa completely off balance. "I do," she said, recovering. "I absolutely do." I nodded slowly. "Okay, Lisa." She waited another beat for the collapse that wasn't coming, then turned and walked back toward the elevator. I sat there and checked my watch. I didn't know it yet, but the call I'd been waiting 6 months for had already been made, from a building 6 miles east of where I was sitting. I should back up, because none of what came next makes sense without the part that came before. The divorce had been brutal in the financial sense. Not because Krista and I fought viciously over assets. We didn't. But because the asset review my attorney, a sharp woman named Helen Greer, forced both sides to conduct, turned up something that had nothing to do with our marriage at all. Krista's father, Richard Wendy, had died in April 2018. He was 52, a commercial electrician from Westerville, and he'd left behind a $280,000 annuity through a group policy with his employer. The annuity was structured to pay out over 15 years, with the named beneficiary designated to receive quarterly distributions beginning 60 days after Richard's death. The named beneficiary was Krista. What Helen found, buried in 6 years of financial records during the asset review, was that Krista had never received a single distribution. Not one. Helen brought the discrepancy to me in July 2024, 4 months after the divorce was finalized, because the audit she'd ordered continued past the closing date. She spread the documents across the conference table in her office on North High Street and walked me through it carefully. The annuity had been paying out since June 2018. Quarterly. On schedule, but the disbursement address on record, quietly updated with the insurance company in May 2018, 1 month after Richard's death, was not Krista's address. It was Lisa's. Helen looked at me. "This is a forgery case, Michael. Someone filed a beneficiary address change using Krista's signature." Krista wasn't living at this address in May 2018. She was living with you in Grandview Heights. I sat very still for a long moment, not because I was surprised. I'm a forensic accountant. I know what forged paperwork looks like. I sat still because I was already calculating the number. 6 years of quarterly distributions from a $280,000 annuity. I ran it in my head. Somewhere between $90,000 and $110,000, depending on the distribution schedule. Gone, diverted, quietly pocketed by the woman who had just told me, in a hospital hallway, that I was always the problem. Helen's advice was careful. File it separately, independently, through the Ohio Department of Insurance Fraud Division. Don't attach it to the divorce proceedings. A vindictive ex-husband's filing could be dismissed or delayed. File it clean, file it cold, and let the investigators do their work. I took her advice. I filed in September 2024. By March 2025, the case had been open for 6 months. I hadn't said a word to Krista. I hadn't said a word to anyone. Now, sitting in that hospital waiting room with Lisa's voice still hanging in the air, I took a slow breath and set down my coffee. 5 minutes. I looked at the clock on the wall. My appointment was in 5 minutes. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The thing about forensic accounting is that it teaches you to love the waiting. The evidence doesn't move. The numbers don't change. You just have to stay patient while the world catches up to what you already know. My appointment with Dr. Farrow lasted about 25 minutes. Blood pressure was down to 118/76, the best reading in 2 years. Stress markers improved. He scribbled something on his notepad and looked up with the quiet satisfaction that doctors reserve for patients who finally stopped ignoring their own bodies. "Whatever you changed, doctor," Farrow said, clicking his pen, "keep doing it." "Turned in a big project," I said. He signed off on my chart and sent me on my way. I shook his hand, collected my paperwork from the front desk, and walked back down the second-floor corridor toward the elevator bank. The maternity ward was one hallway over. I could hear a television somewhere behind a closed door and the low murmur of a nursing handoff at the station to my left. Normal hospital Monday. Nothing remarkable. Lisa was gone. I confirmed that before I pressed the call button. I pressed it anyway. Checked my phone. Nothing urgent. I had a client file waiting on my desk on East Broad Street and a 1:30 call I didn't particularly want to reschedule. I was already planning the rest of my morning. That was when I heard footsteps behind me, not Lisa's measured, deliberate pace, but something quicker, purposeful, heels on linoleum. I turned. A woman in a dark navy blazer was moving toward me with intent. Badge clipped to her lanyard. a file folder tucked under one arm and a leather-bound notepad in her other hand. She was around 40, composed, with the particular kind of calm that comes from spending years delivering news that changes people's lives. Not cruelty, not pleasure, just the occupational steadiness of someone doing a job that requires it. Mr. Fox? Yes, she extended her hand. Dana Marsh, Ohio Department of Insurance Fraud Division. I tried your office this morning. Your assistant mentioned you had a medical appointment here. I hope you don't mind me coming to you. I shook her hand. I don't mind. Good. She opened the folder without ceremony. We've been working your September filing for the past 6 months. I wanted to update you personally, since you filed through proper channels and followed every instruction to the letter. She looked up. We've completed the full audit. Disbursement records, signature analysis on the beneficiary address change form filed in May 2018, and direct comparison against notarized samples of Christine Banks's signature from the same period. She paused. It's a forgery. The address change form was not signed by your ex-wife. I exhaled slowly. What happens now? We're moving to formal charges this week. Lisa Wendy will be formally notified Thursday morning. She closed the folder. You won't need to appear unless the case goes to trial. We have everything we need. I held her gaze for a moment. Does Krista know? Dana Marsh's expression shifted, not to pity, exactly, but to something measured. Our investigators spoke with Christine Banks yesterday afternoon. She cooperated fully. She let a half-beat pass. She was not aware of the diversion. I hadn't expected that to land the way it did. Not relief, not exactly. Something older and quieter, like a door closing softly in a house you'd already left. Somewhere in the back of everything I'd been carrying for 2 years, I'd kept a small, stubborn hope that Krista hadn't known. It didn't repair anything. It didn't change the marriage or the betrayal or the 7 years that had ended the way they ended. But it meant the woman I'd once loved had not been standing in the room when her mother quietly stole her dead father's money and spent it across 6 years of ordinary Mondays. That mattered. I couldn't have explained exactly why. It just did. Thank you for coming in person, I said. You filed it correctly. Dana tucked the folder back under her arm. No personal motive attached, no conflict with your divorce proceedings, no complicating factors. Clean filing, clean case. She nodded once. We appreciate that more than you might know. We'll be in touch with next steps. She turned and walked back down the corridor, past the nurse's station, past the hallway that led toward the maternity ward, and disappeared around the far corner. I turned back to the elevator and pressed the button a second time. I didn't know it yet, but Lisa Wendy was still in the building. The doors opened on an empty car. I was about to step in when I heard the elevator on my left, the second bank around the corner, open with a soft chime. Footsteps, the particular rhythm of low heels on tile. Lisa came around the corner with her coat over one arm and her phone in her other hand, the expression of a woman recalculating her next errand. She nearly walked straight into me. She stopped. Her eyes adjusted. Michael. A flicker. Irritation. Surprise. Something she hadn't budgeted for. Still here. Just leaving. I stepped slightly to the side to give her room. Have a good afternoon, Lisa. She started to move past me, and then she didn't. Because Dana Marsh was still faintly visible at the far end of the corridor. Just visible. A figure in a dark blazer rounding the corner 60 feet away. Lisa didn't know who she was, but she had seen her walk directly toward me. She had seen the badge. She had seen me stand there with my hands easy at my sides while the woman spoke at length and showed me an open folder. Lisa turned back slowly. Who was that? I looked at her for a long moment. The elevator doors were still open behind me. Someone from the state insurance office, I said. She had an update on a case I filed in September. The cold math started moving behind Lisa's eyes. I watched it happen, the slight stillness that comes when a person is running a calculation they don't want to finish. Her mouth opened and then closed without producing a word, which was unusual for a woman who had never had trouble finding them. What kind of case? Her voice was different now. Quieter, careful, the kind with your name on a form it shouldn't be on. I stepped back into the elevator. You should probably speak with an attorney, Lisa, today, if you can manage it. The doors closed. I rode down to the lobby alone, watched the floor numbers fall, 2, then 1, then G. The lobby opened out into the pale March light coming through the main entrance. I walked through it and out into the parking structure on the north side of the building. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that, because people always expect the triumphant version of this moment, and it wasn't that. It was tired. It was the specific exhaustion that follows a very long period of discipline, of carrying something heavy and fragile and not dropping it, not once, for 6 months. While life moved around you as though you weren't quietly holding a live case file in your hands, the truth had gotten there. I'd just been the one to write down the right address. I sat in my car in the parking structure for about 4 minutes. The sun was cutting through the open levels of the structure at a low angle and hitting the windshield at the exact wrong degree. I turned the key, adjusted the visor, and sat there watching the light change. My phone buzzed. Helen Greer. Heard from Dana Marsh's office. They're filing Wednesday. You doing okay? I typed back, yes. Thank you for everything you did. 3 dots appeared. Then, you did the work, Michael. I just followed the numbers. So did I thought, and pulled out of the parking space. Wednesday came and went the way Wednesdays do when you've already made your peace with the outcome. Lisa Wendy was formally charged on March 20th, 2025, with insurance fraud and forgery under Ohio Revised Code Sections 2913.02 and 2913.31. The charges covered the period from May 2018 through September 2024. 6 years, 14 quarterly distributions, a total of $96. $400 diverted from an annuity that had been left to her own daughter by her own husband. I was at my desk on the 4th floor of our office on East Broad Street when Helen called at 9:15 that morning. I was reviewing a completely unrelated client file, a commercial real estate dispute. Nothing dramatic. They filed, Helen said. Good, I said. That's it? Good? Good, I said again. She laughed, the short, dry laugh of a woman who has spent 30 years in law and still occasionally gets surprised. You're the calmest client I've ever had. It wasn't my case to win, I said. I just handed it to the right people. She told me to call if I needed anything. I thanked her, hung up, and went back to the real estate file. There's no dramatic moment I can offer you for that Thursday. No confrontation, no courtroom entrance, no grand reckoning. Just a quiet morning, a phone call, and the knowledge that the process was moving the way it was supposed to move, at the speed it was supposed to move, because I had done exactly what I was supposed to do and then gotten out of its way. What I can tell you is what happened in the weeks after, because that's the part people need to hear. Not just the confrontation, but the after. The aftermath is where you find out what things actually cost and what they were actually worth. Krista called me on a Saturday, about 10 days after the charges were filed. It was late morning, and I was making coffee in my kitchen in Grandview Heights, looking out at the street below. Her name on my phone screen was a strange thing to see. I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. It wasn't a long call, maybe 12 minutes. She didn't apologize for the marriage. I didn't expect her to, and I didn't need her to. What she said, in the careful, measured voice of someone who had clearly thought very hard about this conversation before making it, was that she hadn't known. That the investigators had sat across from her in a conference room and walked her through 6 years of disbursement records line by line, and she had sat there in complete silence, because there was nothing to say. Her father had died in April 2018. The annuity had started paying out in June 2018. And every quarter for the next 6 years. The money had gone somewhere she'd never once thought to look. I thought about calling you when it happened, she said, when they told me. But I didn't know what I'd say. You didn't have to say anything, I said. I know. A pause. But I wanted to say, you didn't have to file it the way you did. You could have used it in the divorce. Made it part of the proceedings. Her voice dropped slightly. You didn't. It wasn't mine to use, I said. It was your father's money. It belonged to his case, not mine. There was a long pause, the kind of pause that has a lot of weight in it. Yeah, Krista said finally. It was. We didn't say much after that. We said goodbye and I set my phone on the counter and stood there looking at my kitchen, my apartment, my quiet Saturday morning. My life that had slowly and deliberately been rebuilt from the ground up, piece by piece, over the past year. Not dramatic, not sudden, just steady work, one day at a time. That was the closest thing to closure I was going to get. Not reconciliation. Not vindication in any triumphant sense, just the recognition that I'd done the right thing and she knew it. Sometimes that's all you get. And sometimes, more often than people admit, that's enough. Lisa retained a criminal defense attorney within 48 hours of the charges. The case moved through the Franklin County court system over the following months. The evidence was clean because the filing had been clean. No emotional interference. No contested motives. No ex-husband making dramatic accusations. Just a forensic audit, a set of forged documents, and 6 years of disbursement records that didn't need anyone to interpret them. They told the story in plain numbers. Lisa pled no contest in August 2025. She was ordered to make full restitution, all $96,400, and sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation with the possibility of early termination for full compliance. No prison time, which surprised some people. It didn't surprise me. She was 59 years old, no prior record, and the restitution order was the consequence that actually mattered. The money went back to Krista. Her father had wanted her to have it. After 7 years, she finally did. I didn't know Richard Wendy well. He'd passed 18 months before Krista and I got married, and what I knew of him came mostly from photographs on her parents' walls and the occasional stories she'd tell. An electrician who built everything from nothing, worked until his back gave out, then kept working anyway. The kind of father who didn't talk much about love because he thought showing up every day was the same thing. He'd left that money for his daughter because he wanted her to have something he couldn't give her himself. Security, a soft landing somewhere, if she ever needed it. I'd never met him and I didn't know him, but I understood what that annuity was. I wasn't going to let it disappear into someone else's account because it was legally convenient for me to look the other way. That's the education underneath the story if you're looking for it. Not just don't steal, but the things people leave behind for the ones they love deserve to get there. If you ever find yourself holding information that could set something right, something that has nothing to do with your own grievance, nothing to do with your own score to settle, file it. File it clean. And then get out of the way. Kelvin and Krista are still together, as far as I know. Their son turned 1 this past January. I hope the boy grows up well. That part isn't about me. What is about me is this. I'm 41 years old. I have a good apartment near Grandview Heights, a cardiologist who looks at my chart the way you look at something that used to be a problem and isn't anymore, and a talent for finding the numbers people try to hide. I went back to Riverside for my follow-up this past March. Same second-floor corridor, same elevator bank, same pale morning light coming through the windows. I stood at the elevator and I thought about Lisa Wendy standing right there, 12 months earlier, announcing my life's verdict to a hallway that hadn't asked for it. I pressed the button. The doors opened. I rode up. The hallway smelled like it always does, antiseptic and clean cotton, and the particular institutional warmth of a building full of people trying to get better. I sat in the waiting area with a coffee and my phone, and I let my mind go quiet. My grandmother had a saying she repeated so often it became wallpaper: the truth doesn't need your help to get there. It just needs you to stay out of its way. I stayed out of its way. It got there. That's the whole story. If you take one thing from what Michael shared, let it be this. Patience isn't the same as doing nothing. Sometimes patience is filing the right document on the right day through the right channel and then trusting the process to move at its own speed. If someone has been quietly running a story about you in a hospital corridor, across a dinner table, in a church pew, the answer isn't to shout louder. It's to stay accurate. Truth filed cleanly, is louder than anything Lisa Wendy ever said at that nurse's station. Share this with someone who's carrying something heavy and waiting for the right moment. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.